Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Dive Into Diet with Lucas Schmidt. And we're doing a part 2 today, Lucas.
Part 2, sequel.
Part 2. Part 1 will be in the description below if you have not caught that yet. What is part 2?
Part 2 of training for longevity.
Okay.
So I will say, before you leave this video and go to part 1, you don't have to have seen part 1. You can watch this one first and then go to that one if you want to get all the pieces.
Order necessarily.
So in part 1, we talked about grip strength and zone 2 cardio. Today, it's stability. And I put a bunch of names for this category. We'll say power, but that includes things like burst strength, high intensity, short-term strength. And so I'll go into detail in a second about what that means.
I love that.
Also, for reference, some of this information does come from Dr. Peter Attia, who has a great channel on YouTube and probably other places, podcasts. I just use YouTube, about longevity particularly. So if you want a more refined, a better presented, and more educated explanation of what I'm about to talk about, you can look into Peter Attia. He's awesome. So, but let's move on. Let's not move on. Let's start with stability. Moving on. Done. We're done with the episode.
See ya.
Great. All right. That's all you need to know. Stability. Let's start with that. So, what I categorize stability as, in strength and in terms of physical health, is the ability to move in all planes of motion, fluidly and carefully. Okay? Control. Okay? So that what I mean by planes of motion, frontal, oh crap. I said crap on the podcast anyway. There's actually technical terms for this. When you get your training license, they're very clinical sounding. Frontal is one of the planes.
Anterior, posterior.
Well, that's the locations. So, but what I mean in layman's terms by planes of motion is you could lunge forward if you needed to. You could step backwards, lunge backwards if you needed to. You could lunge to each side if you needed to, and everywhere in between. So angular motion. You can twist this way while your legs are that way, and you could grab something without throwing at your back. Things like that. Functional movement, because we live in a multi-planar world. We don't. You know, we're not stick figures, and we're not trapped on a TV screen. We don't have to move flat ways.
Right.
And forwards, we move in all directions. So. Excluding completely 360, like an out, like we can't turn our heads all the way around.
So stability is more movement.
Yeah, it's controlled movement. Okay. Right? You want to be able to move in these directions without falling or dislocating something.
So balance.
Or hyperextending.
Yeah.
Yeah, its balance is included in stability. So they're often used interchangeably or together.
Okay.
I wouldn't say they're quite synonyms for each other.
Yeah.
I think there's a difference, but they're in the same category.
Agreed.
And why is this training for longevity? Why, would you ask? Well, because especially when you're past like 60 and 70, probably past 70 at this point with our longer life expectancies, the biggest concern is falling.
Absolutely.
You don't want to fall. Nobody wants to fall.
Absolutely.
You're 5 years old. Yeah. But we tend to absorb falls better when we're younger. Our bone density is better, etc. So stability is crucial, and a couple of things that we train for stability. I wrote some things to keep my thoughts on track.
He's very organized, by the way, guys.
At least today I am. Eccentric strength is the first thing I want to talk about. Now, this applies to things outside of stability as well, but eccentric strength, if I had to put it in fun terms, putting on the brakes is how I would describe it. So let me give you an example. It's easy to do this with my upper body. When I curl a weight up, like I'm going to curl in the gym, a lot of people make the mistake of curling and letting their arm fall. Yep. Curling and letting their arm fall. You are skipping the stable training of that exercise if you do that, and as a bonus, the best part to grow muscle, eccentric strength. Concentric strength is contracting. I'm firing the muscle. I'm shortening the muscle fibers to move that weight. But the eccentric strength is the opposite. It's the slow release of the contraction. But that's actually the eccentric phase is what we call it in strength training, is the main phase for building muscle, not the concentric. That doesn't mean you can't build muscle with concentric training, but you'll build more muscle more efficiently if you don't skip the eccentric phase. You also want to train eccentrically because it promotes stability and control. If I whip this muscle up here and I just let it sling down, I am not training for any control. No. You're going to come up here, and you want that slow descent. In fact, when you're trying to bump your weight up, I'm going to continue to use the curl as an example, but this could apply to a lot of exercises. When you're trying to increase weight, that can be really difficult for a few weeks because you're not used to the new weight. It's very heavy. When you get fatigued, you could assist the weight up with the other hand, but still maximize growth and take advantage of that.
Yep.
You're stronger eccentrically than concentrically too, which is cool. So you're stronger in that phase, you have more control in that phase, and you develop more control if you use and focus on that phase.
It's fascinating.
Another thing, like, for example, exercises that typically are too difficult for some people, like pull-ups. You can do eccentric pull-ups even if you can't do a pull-up. What I mean by that is you could get a step or like a stair step or a stool. Say you can't pull yourself up to the pull-up bar. Most people can't these days. Most men and women. A regular pull-up without assist is out of most people's reach. You step up on some stairs, you can step yourself up or even jump, get up there, and lower yourself slowly. You'll be not saying everybody can do that, but that some people, that might be the difference for them. Yeah. You train in that phase for a while, eventually you might be able to start doing them. But at any rate, you're training those back muscles in a really good way. Yeah. So eccentric training is great for stability. And it applies to think of any exercise where you contract, which, by the way, should be any strength exercise. You have to contract the muscles to use them. Don't skip see, I'm putting the brakes on the weight so it doesn't just fall. I've got brakes on. That would apply to a squat. Now, the squat is you lower. Like, so if you put a barbell on your back, the eccentric phase is at the beginning. Yep. I'm lowering into the squat, and then I'm exploding out by contracting my legs. Don't fall into a squat with a barbell on your back. That's incredibly dangerous for your knees and a lot of things. You need to control the descent, but also you're missing out on free extra muscle building. So there's that. The other thing you can do, the other category is joint stability. That kind of comes in tandem with eccentric training. So if we're lifting weights or doing any kind of exercise, that braking phase builds joint stability. The other aspect would be balance. Balance training can mostly be incorporated if you have good form in a lot of your leg exercises, squats and things like that. But if you're looking for extracurricular activities that develop balance, probably my first would be Tai Chi.
That's interesting.
YouTube has free Tai Chi demos on it. Most any Tai Chi, even bad Tai Chi, like not legit Tai Chi, some whatever. The focus is balance and control, and it's light. It's a very low impact, slow, but again, walking like slow motion without doing this is really hard to do. So don't underestimate the people who do Tai Chi. It takes a lot of control. But again, it builds mind-muscle connection, and that's the other aspect that gets addressed is mind-muscle connection, knowledge and control of where you're moving and how you're moving. So that's a marker for that's a training aspect.
Makes
for
so
longevity.
much sense.
That's more protecting you. The balance aspect is protecting you from injury when you're older, when you're less coordinated. So,
and also balance takes strength too.
It does take. It's a different kind of strength.
Yeah.
You want to do a quick test at home to see if your balance is good? Stand normal. Pick one foot up, but don't bring it over to the other leg. You can bring it in a little bit. Don't tuck the knee. Don't tuck it behind the other foot. Try to keep it hovering over where it just was. You'll find that if you can't do that, it's time to start training your balance. So the next is power or burst strength. So,
and this is all. Can I also say this is fast twitch? Is this fast twitch?
Fast twitch. Yeah, that's real technical. Yeah, fast twitch muscle fiber. So this is the muscle fiber. It doesn't. It has less blood flow to this tissue.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's hard to train this tissue because in order to stimulate it, you have to do very strenuous things, like sprinting, and I mean sprinting like a tiger's after you, right? Sprinting like your life depends on it is one. You'll know, and when you train fast twitch muscles, that's when you get big, like big muscle.
Bulk.
Typically, you'll get bulk from it. So a good example, a marathon runner versus a sprinter.
Yep.
Look at their thighs.
They look different.
The marathon runner, they might have decent thighs. They're going to be skinny. Yeah. They're going to be small. They can run a long time. That's the slow twitch muscle fiber. That's longevity. That's That's long distance muscle.
Yeah,
Endurance.
that's not longevity.
Endurance. It is longevity in its own way. That's zone 2. But sprinting is a burst of strength required, and their thighs are typically large, very muscular, thick thighs. Probably have big glutes too, sprinting power. But they're only sprinting for what the Olympic guys are
100 yards?
10 seconds.
Yeah.
100 yards in
Literally.
10 seconds. It's crazy fast. But other examples would be a power lift, like a deadlift with a high amount of weight. These are like not maybe quite like a max lift, of course, is fast twitch. It's like 1 rep max to get into the nerdiness of the lifts. Or I've mentioned this, reps in reserve, 3 reps in reserve. Almost to failure, essentially, but 3 reps shy. That's pretty intense. That's an intense amount of weight. You might be stimulating some fast twitch. Another would be high-intensity interval training, like sprints as hard as you can for 20 seconds, and then a jog, real easy jog for a minute, and then sprint again, and that kind of. So you'll stimulate some of that in there. So these are burst exercises. This is not something you would need to do very often, this type of exercise.
Okay.
For longevity, right? Depends on your goal. For longevity, we just want to have the ability to engage these muscle fibers.
It makes sense, like
if
to be
needed.
able to run away from something.
Right. We don't want to necessarily kill ourselves every day to engage these muscle fibers, but a couple heavy lifts a week.
Yeah.
And that's functional movement as well.
Yeah.
And the thing about a lot of this, especially the ones in this part, you're going to engage the stability, that eccentric, because even for a power lift, you're going to eccentrically leave it. For the deadlift, for example, you're lifting it, and then you eccentrically set it down. It drives me nuts when I hear a deadlift, and I can hear the barbell hitting the floor really loudly. Bang! Now, I understand on a max lift, maybe you just don't have the energy. That's it. You got to drop the weight or you buckle, right? I don't want you to dislocate your knees or something crazy, but let's calm down a little bit. Lift heavy, but lower that with control to the ground. Again, you're skipping like 60% of your muscle building if you skip that eccentric phase. So even in the power lift, safety first, of course. If you got to bail, you got to bail. But don't skip the eccentric phase for the love of all that's holy. And all of these things, I should say, do with full range of motion. So when you're training for stability or in the power lift,
can you describe what
generally full range of motion, okay? That means, I'll go back to the bicep since it's easiest to show. Not full range of motion. Am I stimulating my bicep? Yeah, probably. Could I stimulate it way more? Yes. Lock out. Curl. All the way to full extent, like locking the elbow at the base, then curling.
Yep.
If you can curl 35 pounds here, that's a lot to curl. Right here, no, it's not. Because if you can't curl it down here, I say you can't curl it. You got to lower the weight. You're going to lose some weight if you go to full range of motion. But again, full range of motion, that full stretch, you build more muscle.
Yeah.
You build more muscle.
More efficient too. Like it just get more.
You have to do less reps. You're going to do less reps, but that's less time. And it's just a better way to work out. And again, we want that full flexibility, that full range of motion, strength through all ranges of the motion of that muscle too. That's important for longevity. So to summarize, stability training, including balance. So eccentric muscle, that's the big thing. And then a great addition would be something like Tai Chi or yoga will teach you some balance too. You can do some yoga. Anything to stimulate balance and focus on how you're moving. And burst strength. So it could be sprinting. For the sprinting, I'd maybe do it once a week, just enough to maybe once or twice a week, depending on how many sessions of workouts you're doing.
Right.
Could be some brief sprinting work, couple minutes, heavy lift here or there, regularly, but that would stimulate those muscle fibers. So
training for longevity.
Training for longevity.
Guys, this was a part 2 episode. You can find part 1 down in the description below. If you want to dive a little deeper, check out Peter Attia's YouTube channel. Wealth of information there. Lucas, man, great job.
Thank you.
Thanks, man. See you guys next time.
Don't go away.